All right, we're live. We're back. I'm Sunny Ray. This is the Sunny Ray Show. Thanks to our sponsors, Raz Rocket, GTM Ventures. Today I'm joined by Marcus. He's the co-founder of Profina. Did I say it right?
Profina, absolutely.
Profina. I got to work on that. Profina. And where are you calling in from, Marcus? You said the Valley?
I am in sunny San Francisco. So we've had a really, really warm side of the year. I know that some of you guys on the East Coast have had the opposite, but definitely sunny here.
Yeah, it's been a tough winter. This year's been crazy. We've had a lot of, I had my car snowed in the other day. So great. So that's good to hear. Let's, I like to always dive in and share a little bit or talk a little bit about your background, kind of your story. So I was reading about your story. It's quite interesting. Is it true that you grew up in Finland?
I did.
Sweden, Spain, and then eventually the US? Yeah.
So Finnish parents moved us around the world, born in Stockholm in Sweden. And then, out of all places, I went through middle school and junior high school in Kansas.
In Kansas. Interesting. And do you come from like a multicultural background, or are you did you grow up in kind of places like that?
Certainly living in different countries. Then that's something that kind of happens by proximity. But I think one of the things why we've stayed here in Silicon Valley, I've been in Silicon Valley now for going on 12 years. And during COVID, then everybody had this question of like, do I stay or do I go? And with my family, then that diversity here, like people talk about Silicon Valley as the tech capital, and 100% it's that. But I think one of the things that people oftentimes miss is that the filter by which people actually arrive here and the diversity that comes out of that's really unique. And when I say unique, there's this joke that it's harder to raise money as an American in Silicon Valley than as a foreigner. And that's not a joke, that's statistics, because the Americans don't go through the filter, the foreigners do. So that's one of the reasons that, we like being here as a family. As an entrepreneur, obviously the exchange of ideas and brilliant people and the diversity in thinking, that's very, very core. But as far as multiculturalism goes, then I would say that for me, it's not just something that I grew up with. It's really something that I try to kind of seek out, because you don't want to have the same type of profile, same type of persona on your team and have like 30 of them. That doesn't work. You need different types of ways of looking at life.
Interesting. So I guess before you were a tech entrepreneur, you were a naval navigation officer. Is that correct, Marcus?
So that's part of Finnish DNA. So everybody gets to go through the military. So I served in the Navy, and I did do that. That was a lot of fun. Many things that when you're younger, you don't appreciate as much, but, especially later on, then I learned to really, really value that. I can't remember how many days at sea I had. But that was definitely something where, just spending a lot of time in the Mediterranean and in the middle of the Atlantic, then, some of the memories I have is, just seeing nothing for weeks but sea, and then the sun come up and down on the other side of the ship. So I did do that. But then after that, I been a tech entrepreneur. I started 3 companies, built all sorts of different things around data, even before what we call AI. Although, to be fair, people have been talking about AI for quite a while.
Yeah, it reminded me of when you mentioned that view. It reminded me of that quote that people talk about in relation to entrepreneurship, which is it's like staring into the abyss and chewing glass or something, right? So I guess my deeper question there was, what did that time there teach you about things like discipline, and how does it apply to your entrepreneurship journey today?
That's a fascinating question. I think there's a lot of things that come out of that where you do get to essentially have this internal control. I think one of the things that maybe really got stressed during that time was just my OCD behavior. So essentially just like, making sure that you have your what's it called, in the controlling seat all the time. And that's something that I've taken with me to various different things that I've done. I think it's also perspective, like, especially when you're in the military, you have to deal with all sorts of different people. So I think that's one of those things that you realize that, humans are quite similar, but there's this one quote that I love, that humanity's challenges are the same, but their solutions are not. And I think that's one of the things that when you have different people kind of from different backgrounds, and then you're forced to get along or forced to kind of work on the same type of challenges, then that's a skill that definitely it taught me. I think one of the things that any entrepreneur knows is that you need to be really good at building teams because you can't do everything yourself. So that's where essentially this type of skill set becomes very clear, that you need to figure out how you just talk to different types of folks. Sounds simpler than it is, but I do see so many failures where people just, I don't know, they ignore the fact that people just are different and you need to get to know them, like basic stuff.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So you have do you have two master's degrees? I think one from
So
computer science, is that? Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, I did study in Helsinki. So after I lived in the US, I went back to Finland for university. I did study at it was then the Aalto University of Technology. Nowadays, it was then the Helsinki University of Technology. Now it's the Aalto University of Technology. I did study computer science, electrical engineering, acoustic systems, lots of fun stuff there, signal processing. And then I also did, I studied economics and finance in the, what's it called, Economics University. One of the things that I'm not sure if folks know about Finland is that there's three things that the Finnish state really values. One is families, second one is healthcare, and third one is education. So there is this right to education that's very innate in Finland. So I did a lot of PhD courses in different university programs. And I remember walking into some of those courses and just saying that, hey, I'm here, I'm interested in this lecture. And then I remember one professor telling me that, hey, you're not enrolled, that you understand that I can't give you credits. And I remember thinking, like, it's a funny discussion. Like, I don't care about the credits. Like, I care about the program and the lecture. So from a US perspective, having also grown up here, it's also funny to kind of think about that type of a system now in retrospect, where, the education is the primary thing. And if you want to seek out that education, as long as you're not disrupting class, you can practically get in anywhere you want.
So your LinkedIn bio says you're a competitive athlete who cares about personal freedom and likes puzzles. Tell me about the athlete side. What sport, how serious, and does physical competition inform how you approach building a company?
Yes. I've always been very competitive. So as I've got older, where I apply that has just changed. So nowadays I compete in ultra marathons, and specifically trails and mountain ultras, which is a lot of fun. And what that means is, for example, in 3 months, I'll be doing the Broken Arrow Sky Race, which is a 46K race in Tahoe up the Palisades ski slopes, the mountains. And you do this loop where you essentially run the ridge. I can't remember how much elevation. It's like maybe 13,000 feet of elevation. And you do that twice. I did that last year, the first time. A lot of fun. Started snowing. This is in the middle of June. Started snowing toward the end. And there was lightning. So they had to evacuate the runners. Not me. I managed to finish before that. So I do those things. I really like that physical aspect of pushing yourself. And I think one of the things that a mentor of mine said at some point, I think I was running the second company at that time, and they said that, you can't, like, in running a startup, you can't control everything, right? Like, there's a lot of externalities that you have to kind of set yourself up for luck, but you can't ultimately influence everything. And he told me that the one thing that you can do is you can see gains in your own fitness and in your own health. Like, those are things that are not only essentially from an OCD personality like me, not only rewarding and, addictive to a certain extent, but they're also such that if you need to have that control somewhere, then exerting that control and directing it more toward your own fitness and health, that's not necessarily a bad thing for the long term. So that was something that's fairly obvious, but that was something that one of my mentors then kind of maybe saw that they could essentially just instill on me. So that's where that's come from. But I love doing all those different things in terms of things that require you to push yourself. Like, for example, last year during my birthday, We were over in Europe, and I just decided that, I'm going to get up at 2, and then I ran 100 kilometers or 100 and some kilometers to our lake house. And then I remember, my friends just asked, like, is that really what you want to do on your birthday? But, that was really what I wanted to do on my birthday. That was absolutely gorgeous. The only downside was that there was a storm the night before, and I ran through a swamp. So that was the first 20 miles of my run, just running through like knee height water, which is not necessarily ideal if you have to run, 70 miles afterwards.
Oh, whoa, sirs. You got to be my business partner, Charles. He does like ultra marathons and 100-kilometer things. And oh my goodness, yeah, it's amazing what the human body is capable of doing, right? When you push yourself. So you spent years, just to kind of switch gears a little bit, in the financial data machine, right? Running
Yes.
back office systems for financial platforms worldwide. At what point did you start to see a deeper problem, right? Where beyond just finance and about actually like who owns the data and controls the personal data? Like when did these topics start to become top of mind for you?
It's actually really clear in my head that I ran a company called Diffitech, which was an API first back office company for various different financial marketplaces. One of the things that started happening, it started coming from Europe, was this regulation around GDPR. So the right to your own data and, the right to essentially get your data and so on and so forth. But there were other similar type of regulations that came out of the EU. Like there was a Payment Services Directive, PSD2, that came out. And all of those, basically, what happened was that a lot of the clients that we were working with, they stopped seeing data as only a positive. Because up until then, it had been a land grab that let's just collect as much data as we possibly can. But once essentially those regulations came out, then that data started having a cost as well, especially personal data. And a lot of those institutions, because we worked with some asset managers, banks, broker dealers, lenders, and so on and so forth, some of those folks then started realizing that actually this data, especially the personal data, might be more of a liability for us than a benefit. And it was really, really interesting in a way where we started looking at it from that point of view that, okay, we all have so much data. But if these organizations are, realizing that, hey, maybe there's like this line that we shouldn't be collecting this much data about individuals, then that doesn't mean that the data is not there. I mean, it's still there. So it started kind of circulating with this idea that, okay, if it's our data, it's data about us, then shouldn't we ourselves be able to use that? And I know, Sunny, you also have a background in the Bitcoin market and kind of like the decentralized movement. I think there's a lot of this concept there that goes into like the self-sovereignty. And I think with data, this is a really, really fundamental thing. And I will say that 10 years ago, when we had this realization, or 8 years ago, it wasn't as actionable as it would be today. But now with the AI systems, it's almost kind of this question that, how are you going to have your own agents work for you and for your own interest without this data? And that's kind of where Profina comes full circle, that if you have this data, then your AI systems, the ones that you use, your agentic systems, whatnot, they can have the relevant context about you. They can know how to serve you. But that needs to then fulfill all these promises that we had around self-sovereignty, about authority, and so on and so forth. But that was the moment. I remember that very clearly, where there was like this land grab of let's like get all the data we have. And then there's this risk that, okay, now the data has certain protections. And a lot of institutions, for the first time, they realize that, we might have to think about this a little bit more carefully. And that was sort of like a line in the sand. And then the years that passed after that, then we kind of went into that direction where individuals got more and more rights and more authority over the data. As I mean, it's our data at the end of the day. So of course that makes sense from that point of view. But it also has kind of teetered the industry and teed it up in a way that if you have and start to have more rights and more ownership over your data, then the question very logically comes that, okay, what do you do? Like, what do you practically do, and how is your life better based on this? And I think that's where essentially the legislation and the regulations stop. And that's where essentially the entrepreneurs come. that you figure out like, okay, how do you leverage this for the individual's benefit?
Got it. Interesting. So you've described your philosophy as you have to learn faster than the challenges unfold. Was there a specific moment, a failure, a conversation, a trend, or something that you spotted that made you realize the current data model was fundamentally broken and you had to build something from scratch?
I think that actually just comes from this very practical view that as you're building companies or as you're building anything, I think you realize that there is no empirical science behind it. Like the only thing that actually is true is just trial and error, that you just test different things and you see how they work, you measure, and then you do something better. But if that's true, and I fundamentally believe that that's the methodology, then the question becomes, how many times at bat do you have? And then it becomes a question of velocity. So if you think about, for example, a enterprise that releases software once a year, then I mean, they have an opportunity to gather feedback once a year. But if you think about like a startup releasing software, for example, every day and collecting feedback and releasing a new version every day, then I mean, which one's going to learn faster? And I think it's hands down the one that has the more rapid iteration cycles. So I think that's kind of the philosophy that I've had, and I've tried to apply it into everything, that instead of essentially theorizing and creating like the most perfect hypothesis, then I mean, if you essentially have a good enough guess and you can throw it out in the market and you can get feedback, then most likely your second guess or your third guess is going to be a lot more on the money than that first one that you kind of hold back. So whenever I have one good colleague that always says this, that are we doing something or are we just speculating? And it always kind of like, it's always a good wake up call, because sometimes you get so stuck in your head, and if it's in your head or within your team, I mean, it's not going anywhere. It's not taking you forward. So it's like you always have to have this forward momentum. And I think that's kind of one of those areas where my philosophy has developed quite a lot, that it's these moments at bat that matter. And it's this iteration cycle and the speed of that velocity. That one's absolutely key for kind of getting where you want to get to. It doesn't mean that, you don't hit it out of the park on the first try. Like even OpenAI and GPT-3, I mean, that took a while. But it's sort of like, if you have a reasonably good domain and like a good, let's say, radius for your guesses, and then you're just doing like, different types of iterations, then you have this chance, like you're increasing your chance of this breakthrough success at some point. So I like this kind of process from that point of view, that it's not like a one and done, but it's rather like a methodology for increasing the likelihood of essentially that breakout success.
Interesting. Hey, Marcus, I was going to introduce you to my, oh my goodness, my guest host over here. His name's Daniel. He just woke up from nap time. Yeah, we're kind of in between situation right now, where we had my wife's aunt helping for 1.5 years with him, and so she left recently, and we're trying to figure out where he's going to land next. But he's at home for a couple of weeks, and we're trying to make the best of it, so we can keep going. Hopefully he's not. Are you crying, buddy? Yeah, he had a tough day. Cool. So the idea of separating the data layer from the application layer, right? That's, you're creating like a private by default architecture. It sounds simple, but it's, architecturally quite radical. When did that specific insight crystallize for you, and how hard was it to convince early investors that it wasn't crazy?
I think it was a lot harder before we had these AI agents. I think now it becomes a lot simpler to understand. Like, think about it this way, that if you have your own personal AI provided to you by an LLM company, can you switch out the LLM models for competitors? Most likely not. Like, what would be the interest from them? So separating out the data from what is actually using the data, like the large language models, the agentic systems, whatever you have, now that data portability actually becomes a lot more material. Because if you think about like the type of agentic systems or AI systems that you use, like they're all very different and they're all very specialized. So you don't want to feed in the same data and the same information into every single one of them. Like that would be very redundant and slow. So that's where essentially having this portable call it like, we call it a personal data cloud that you can just kind of bring with you to different types of applications. That's something that I think nowadays is a lot clearer. But if you extrapolate a little bit, like where we're going, I think with essentially a lot of the agentic software builder tools, like the V0s, the anti-gravities, lovables of the world, I think the UI layer is going to be completely different in the future. So you're going to be able to essentially use the same type of backend or data or personal data cloud or whatnot from various different types of interfaces. So I think we're kind of getting into this era that actually the UI is going to be disrupted. It's not a question of like, because if anybody can build anything that they want, it's rather a question of what does that then connect to?
Hey, Marcus, do you have a hard stop in 2 minutes, or can we go over by a few?
We can go over. Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So I had a couple questions. So the AI, oh, bless you, buddy. Holy cow. The AI twin concept, right? This digital version of yourself trained on your own data, representing you publicly and helping you privately. It's like a striking idea. When did that vision first come to you? And what was the reaction, the first time you described it to someone?
It was, I forget exactly the date. It's probably 2 years ago. But yeah, I think it's May 2024, something like that. One of my colleagues had taken their own data and they plugged it into an AI. And basically what he was saying is that, hey, I've got this AI that can answer questions on my behalf. Do you want to test it? And I tested it. I wasn't sure if I was just telling him like, hey, this seems a little bit like a gimmick. Like, what are you doing? And he's like, yeah, I don't really know. Whoops. And anyway, so we talked about it a little bit, but the next day he was going to give a speech in front of 3,500 people. So he was like, okay, I'm just going to put this into my slides. Like, I'm just going to put a QR code into my slides. And if people have questions about my presentation, they can ask this AI agent about my presentation. And he did that. He did the presentation. He came back with 400 signups. So nearly 10% of the audience and a lot of discussions. And he had these anecdotal examples where people would be like, fantastic presentation. I have got so many questions. And he was like, yeah, I'll answer them. He's like, no, I'm good. I already talked to your AI twin. And it was, he was just looking at the logs afterwards, and the questions were in every single language. They were very honest, very direct, things that you wouldn't ask a human and things like that. And we realized that actually, yes, from a technology point of view, it might be a little bit of a gimmick, but from a very, very human kind of interaction, sometimes the human isn't available to answer questions, so you can ask the software. Sometimes you don't want to ask the human the questions. Like maybe you want to ask something that's uncomfortable. Maybe you're uncomfortable with the language. Maybe you want to ask it in, and the AI obviously speaks every single language. And then the third one is that the presenter, the human that owns the AI twin, they don't always get the feedback. So they don't always essentially get like what worked and what didn't work, because some people will give you feedback, but when people are talking to software, I mean, their tone and the way that they ask the question, that gives you feedback already. So that was something of an eye-opener for us, that actually, there's a lot of things where I might not be available, but if I have an AI twin where I've curated what it knows, some people will want to interact with that. And fast forward to today, my AI twin answers all my email, because why would I answer my email? Like, my AI twin knows enough about Profina and the company and AI twins and so on and so forth. So if somebody's got a question about those that don't require me, my AI twin will answer in a minute. And it will say that, hey, this is Marcus's AI twin answering on his behalf because I know the answer. And then it will respond. So it's kind of like this very logical thing where, what do I as a human actually need to do? And I certainly don't need to answer the same question over and over. Like, that's not a great use of my time. And then also for the recipient, I'm not the fastest at answering. So if my AI twin can deliver an answer quicker, happy customer.
Cool. Well, Marcus, I guess last question, maybe help me land the plane. You've been building towards this vision of, personal data freedom since before GDPR, since before ChatGPT, before the AI race kicked off, right? So now that the world has caught up to the conversation you've been having for years, what's the moment you're building towards? What does winning look like for you and your company, and for individuals everywhere?
I think in the future, the way that we look at it is on your business card, you're going to have your email, your phone number, and your AI twin. Like that's it. Like that's kind of the future where we see that it's going to be as ubiquitous as that. And then that AI twin, it's going to be your household staff orchestrator. Like it's going to run all the agentic systems on your behalf. Because once you get to know it and once it gets to know you and you trust it, then you don't want to repeat yourself to every single agentic system that you got. So that's kind of where we see it going. But if you imagine that, imagine this analogy. So the older colleagues that I have, they often say that, email was thought about in the very same way, that it was a ludicrous idea that everybody would have their own email, because email was an enterprise thing at the start. So when somebody had their first email address, people were like almost laughing at them, like, hey, what is this gimmick? So I think AI is kind of set to be in a similar type of thing. Like we already know that enterprises are going to go gangbusters over the entire thing. But the question is, for us as individuals, surely we're going to have our own as well. And those that we have, hopefully they're actually advocating on our behalf. So that's the vision that we've got, that it's almost like a renaissance of the household staff, that it's just agents and AI in that sense. And it's something that all of us have essentially this capability to augment ourselves, but also have this army of agents at our disposal, but ones that are actually working on our behalf and on our side.
That's awesome. Hey, Marcus, we named this stream Software Ate Work. Now what? Do you want to leave us maybe with some parting thoughts or comments in terms of where we were going with that? I know it's a bit intriguing.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I oftentimes think about is that once my agent is responding to my email, my communication, it's doing a lot of I've given it a lot of competence. It can kind of answer a number of different types of questions. Then what's my role? And I think this is a really interesting thought. And I'm a problem solver. Like that's one of the things I really love doing. So my role is very much kind of think about like, okay, how do we solve these problems, and then work with those types of agentic systems. But this does also change kind of where the human sits. I think human in the loop and human at the center, these are very, very nice principle thoughts, and they're things that obviously we advocate for. But the question is, where exactly does that human sit? And I think this is where essentially my encouragement for everybody is to really think about and adopt all of these systems, if not for anything else, to kind of figure out then what is your unique place where you want to be. And sometimes it's a thing that you enjoy the most. Sometimes it's a thing that you're the best at. Hopefully those correlate as much as possible. But it's also an opportunity for sometimes shifting that seat, because a lot of the things that these AI tools can do, I mean, they're infinitely patient, but they also have a lot of muscle to execute and action different things. So I think that is a superpower that you can kind of discover. But this entire aspect of what work is, I would argue that the laws of physics have changed around that quite a bit. Not necessarily in the big companies, but certainly in the startups. And I think also on like the contractor and the freelancer side. But I'm expecting that over the next 24 months, that's going to distribute also to the larger companies. So it's not a question of like, everybody has to figure this out somehow. But I think right now there's still a huge opportunity to experiment and find that area where, how do you actually leverage these agents in the best possible way yourself?
Agreed. Well, Marcus, thank you for your time. Thank you for all the people that tuned in for the stream, and everyone else that watches this in the future. Until next time. Yeah. Marcus, hang out for a minute. Yeah, hang out for a minute. I'll just bring this stream to a close. I'll see you on the other side.